Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Liturgy of the Chalice. Thank you so much for coming today. Our Gospel of Matthew, part 9, will be the discussion of the day. So we're going to continue with the discussion of the Beatitudes as they appeared on the Sermon on the Mount and the Gospel of Matthew. So understanding the Beatitudes. If this is the first session on Beatitudes that you're viewing, I encourage you to listen to the earlier ones and possibly the later ones if you see this in the future on the internet. It's very important to understand what Jesus' experience was when he was vocalizing these Beatitudes to his hearers. So understanding the Beatitudes were not blessings, but prophecies of the coming Son of Mankind collective Messiah. The Messianic age had begun, but the collective Messiah was just beginning to come into being. Whenever we are reading Jesus' words, blessed are the hungry, for they shall have their fill, it sounds like there is some future tense happening there. Something is going to happen in the future. Or blessed are those who are pure of heart, for they will see God. It sounds like it's at some time in the future. But the fact is that Jesus didn't speak in a future tense. The Hebrew-Aramaic, the Galilean Hellenistic Hebrew-Aramaic language that Jesus spoke used the prophetic perfect tense, something called the prophetic perfect tense. And in this particular Hellenistic Galilean Hebrew-Aramaic, there was no past tense and there was no future tense, only perfect or imperfect tense, something that is happening or something that is not happening. And Greek was much different. The Greek language in which our four canonical Gospels are written in, they had past, present, and future tenses, like our English language does, which also greatly contributed to the misunderstanding and contortions of Jesus' probable historical teachings. As we go into the future of different Matthean chapters and verses, you'll see that this idea of a future tense, making Jesus speak of the future, made many theologians and early Christian thinkers up to today's time to believe that something would happen in the future when Jesus never spoke with a future tense, which causes some kind of idea about eschatological beliefs, the end of the world, or judgment day, or resurrection day. A lot of Jesus's phrases were taken incorrectly to mean something happening in the distant future. But all prophets, including the Master Jesus, Mar Yeshua, were prophesying for people of their time. They were speaking directly to the people of their time and prophesying things that they would see that proved that God was alive and with them. We see very similar sayings to the Sermon on the Mount Beatitudes in the Gospel of Luke, where it's called the Sermon on the Plain. But they are different, and when you put them side by side, they are different. Luke also includes the woe verses, the woe to thee who do this, or the woe to thee that do that. The Matthean version of the Beatitudes are much more true to the Aramaic core than the Lucan version. That's what we'll say for now until we get to the Gospel of Luke sometime in the future. So Beatitude number 3. Matthew 5:6. Most English versions of the Bible say, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. A better understanding, and how Jesus would have actually said it, in the prophetic perfect tense is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they are being filled. Right now, they're being filled in the messianic marriage banquet. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Often in the modern world, whenever we say that somebody is righteous, there's righteous indignation, right? When somebody is righteous, it usually means that they're full of pride and that they're the opposite of humble. They're prideful, they're full of spiritual pride, their nose is up in the air, they think themselves better than others, is in the modern context how we view righteousness to be. But righteousness means that you want to become right with God. You want to align yourself with God. So Jesus is saying, blessed are those who hunger and thirst to become right with God. How do you become right with God? How do you become aligned with God? According to Jesus, it's by doing the Torah. Jesus said that not one word, not one letter of the Torah, the Hebrew Testament, should be left unfulfilled by his disciples. And in context, Jesus, Mar Yeshua's halakha, or his teaching, his proto-rabbinic teaching, would be his interpretation of how to fulfill Torah. His methodology, his pedagogy, if you will. So to become right with God means to align your thoughts, words, and deeds with Torah and the teachings of Jesus, which delineate how Torah should be done by those that view themselves as Jesus' disciples. So to be right with God is to do Torah and to do the teachings of Jesus. It's not just to memorize verses of the Bible and spout them off in church or to your Christian friends. In fact, spouting off the verses can often lead to pridefulness or being viewed as a religious snob or being unhumble or prideful. To be right with God is to want to embody the Torah and Jesus' teachings in your life. When you smile, when you show joy in life, when you show kindness, people say, why are you so good? Why are you so happy? Why are you smiling all the time? That is the best form of evangelism. To go out in the streets and say, hell is going to come for you if you don't believe in Jesus Christ. That's bullshit. It's bullshit. To be righteous, to be right with God, is to live, to demonstrate for the world without religious superiority or religious pride or a lack of humility. It is to show through your joyful living that you are embodying the essential spiritual principles outlined in the Torah and in Jesus' teachings. So people who are hungry and they thirst for this, for becoming right for God, these are spiritual seekers. These are spiritual seekers seeking to become in union or communion with God and Mar Yeshua. Those who hunger and thirst to become right with God, to become aligned with God and the teachings of Jesus, they will be filled. Again, look at the better understanding of what Jesus would have actually said. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they are being filled. Right now, they're being filled in the messianic marriage banquet. There are many levels of understanding this. Number one, you, everybody listening to this, you are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. How do I become right with God? How do I become aligned with God? How do I merge my consciousness in the joy of God that makes me act compassionately in the world? Uplifting everybody, no matter their belief or what they look like or how they live. You uplift everybody because they are a child of God. You do not try to bring them down in any way, consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously. This is how you become right with God. We are all hungering and thirsting to become right for God here and now. And those who truly hunger and thirst for this righteousness will come to the liturgy of the Chalice and participate in Eucharist. For they will be filled with the bread and the wine in the Messianic marriage banquet that we celebrate here every Sunday. So on one level of understanding, the Messianic marriage banquet is the Eucharist, because in the Eucharist we celebrate being one or becoming one with the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, the anointed new humanity. So Jesus is saying, blessed are those here now that hunger and thirst for righteousness, for you're being filled with the teachings of the Son of Mankind, Messiah. You are enjoying the bread and wine with us in this Messianic marriage banquet. And of course, there is a higher meaning. Jesus is expressing prophetic vision with each beatitude. And he's saying, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they are being filled in the Messianic marriage banquet in the higher olamim, or spiritual realities, or heavens. In one of the olamim, the highest of the olamim, this is where the great people who have become sainted or perfected beings, they become tam, perfect, shalem, whole. Poetically, they are experiencing this great feast of joy. And that feast of joy is poetic for conscious union with God. So these great beings, which we are aspiring to become, we're aspiring to purify ourselves by making ourselves right with God. When you truly become right with God, you become eligible for spiritual rebirth. And that rebirth is from the first Adam, which is characterized by selfishness. You become reborn into the second Adam, or the new humanity, or the collective Son of Mankind Messiah, also known as the communion of saints. So Jesus didn't teach one Messiah for all time. In Mark, he satirized the Davidic Messiah and said that it didn't make sense. In the Gospel of Thomas, he satirized both the Davidic Messiah and the Messiah ben Joseph, meaning that he didn't have faith in those systems, or that wasn't for him. It didn't resonate for him. Jesus taught the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah, that all of humanity must be anointed by God and rise up to God consciousness, which is spiritual resurrection. So Jesus is saying here, he's prophesying, he's saying, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for in a vision right now, in a prophetic vision, I can see right now they are being filled in the Messianic marriage banquet, both here on earth and in the heavens. I see souls embodying the teachings of Torah in my halakha right now. They are purifying their heart, and they will be filled with God's grace And the sovereignty of God, the Malkuth, will fill them. And this makes them eligible, that even while they're living on this earth, they will become a son of man, an individual Messiah of the collective Messiah. And when they transition from these bodies, they will become absorbed into the communion of saints that exists in the Olamim, or spiritual realities. I see this happening right now. Right now, those who are righteous, they are being filled with the Messianic marriage banquet here on earth in the Eucharist, and in the heavens in their oneness with God consciousness, in their sharing in the co-sovereignty of the Malkuth, the rulership of God over all that is, over all of creation. It's a powerful vision. He's prophesying that there are those that are even there in front of him, hearers of him 2,000 some years ago, that are purifying themselves, they're becoming righteous, and they are being filled with the Messianic marriage banquet, which is the union of soul with God, here on earth during our Eucharist, and in its fulfillment in being one with God in the Olamim, in the communion of saints. Beatitude number 5, Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. That's the traditional English translation. Let's look at the better understanding, how Jesus would have actually spoke in his Hebrew-Aramaic language. Blessed are the merciful, for they are receiving mercy. Right now, you don't have to wait for some future time. If you are merciful right now, you are receiving mercy right now, which refers to Jesus' spiritual teachings on shalach. Shalach is a Hebrew-Aramaic term meaning spiritual release. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who debt against us. A better translation of this popular phrase from the Lord's Prayer, or the Master's Prayer, is release us from our debts as we release those who debt against us. This spiritual release of our debts is done by God only when we release others of the negative consequences of their actions that have accrued on us in thought, word, deed, emotion, memory, all of that. So it's an agreement with God, and Jesus is unique in this. As far as I know, Jesus is the only one that says it this way. Release us of our debt, the negative consequences of our action. Beloved Abba, to the extent that I also release others that have hurt me. My parents, my siblings, my friends, my workmates, past lovers, ex-husbands, ex-wives, anybody who has hurt us. I release them of the negative consequences of their action. When you do this, God releases you of the negative consequences of your action in the same measure that you have released others. This idea of shalach, of spiritual release, is embodied in this 5th beatitude of Matthew. Blessed are the merciful, for they are receiving mercy. When you are merciful to others, when you release them of the negative consequences of their actions, you, in that moment, are receiving mercy from God. God releases you from your negative spiritual consequences, from your sin, when you release others the negative consequences of their sin against you. This is the proper understanding. In the moment, not in some future time after you die in heaven. But if you are being merciful to somebody else and releasing them of the negative consequences of their sin, of their hub, of their bad karma, then right now they are receiving mercy from God, spiritual release from God of the negative consequences of their actions and thought, word, deed. Right now, to the measure that they have released others. That is the meaning of this beatitude. It's also tied to the famous love your enemies teaching of Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus. Heseth. A lot of people ask me, how can I love my enemies? How is it possible to love somebody who has hurt me? And Jesus never said, love your enemies. He said, Heseth your enemies. Have mercy on those who hurt you. Also, Heseth means covenantal love. Covenantal love means fairness. Have fairness with your enemies, with those who have hurt you. The problem is that when somebody hurts us, an instinct of many humans is to hurt them more. If somebody punches me, then I want to cut them, right? Or shoot them. Think of all the school shootings in the United States of America. It's a travesty. Something that only happens in America. Perhaps a kid gets bullied in school, which is terrible because I suffered that all of my childhood, being horribly bullied, horribly abused. But never once did I think to pick up a gun. Never once did I even think to lift a fist. But the fact is that in distorted human minds, people want to hurt people far more than they've been hurt. Judaism is kind of a legalistic religion. There's the covenant between God and his people. A covenant is an agreement. It's a legal agreement. And that agreement says that if you do the commandments of Torah, then you will be one with me. God, humanity, and all beings are one if they follow the way outlined in the Torah, which is explicated in the teachings of Jesus, his halakha, his walk. Right? So, also in the Hebrew Testament, which is alluded to in this verse of Matthew 5:7, is the idea of heseth, or covenantal love for your neighbors, which means that if somebody hurts you in some way, you are going to respond with fairness, with mercy. And this fairness, this mercy, is the covenantal love that you should have for your enemies, those who hurt you in some way, in thought, word, and deed. You don't, inherent in both shalach and heseth, which is the mercy that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5:7, means that you have no feelings of revenge within you. You don't want to hurt the person that hurt you back. But you do want to make common sense actions, fair actions, merciful actions that deter that wayward person, that wayward soul, from hurting you again, or from hurting anybody else the same way. This can take place in a conversation between the two of you. It can take place in a court. It can take place in many different ways in life. But the idea is that it is fair and merciful. But it's not an ooey gooey love. If Jesus really meant love your enemies, he would have said agape your enemies in Greek, which means love in the context that we usually think of love as being in the English language. But hesed is mercy. So blessed are those that are exhibiting hesed, for they are receiving hesed directly from God. This is the understanding of the Beatitude number 5. In the moment you show fairness and mercy to others, you are receiving a commensurate amount of fairness and mercy from God in that moment. When you spiritually release somebody, when you're merciful to them, by releasing them of the negative consequence of their actions and not seeking revenge or the ability to one-up them, then in that moment, you are receiving spiritual release from God. This is a core teaching on the purification of the heart that makes one eligible to become part of the communion of saints, part of the Son of Mankind, collective Messiah. Beatitude number 6, last one to the day, is Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. This makes it seem that those that purify their hearts, that do the teachings of Jesus, they will see God in some future time, perhaps in heaven after they die. That is not what Jesus meant. Remember, the Galilean, Hellenistic, Hebrew-Aramaic of Jesus' time did not have a future tense. It had a perfect or an imperfect tense. Perfect means it's going to happen. Imperfect means it's not going to happen. So the better understanding of how Jesus would have said this beatitude in English is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they are seeing God right now in a divine vision. Blessed are the pure in heart. How do you become pure in heart? By making yourself right with God, by embodying the teachings of Jesus. When you purify your heart fully, or 99.99999% when God takes you the rest of the way, you will have a divine vision of God. Enoch in the Hebrew Testament walked with God. In the intertestamental book of Enoch, he had visions of God, anthropomorphic visions of God. Isaiah, in different Isaiah literature, also had a divine ascent, and he saw God in the other heavens, in the other Olamim. Ezekiel too went up on a chariot, a throne, went up straight in a chariot to the throne of God in the highest heaven. Jacob's ladder, as he ascended that ladder, he saw angels and had divine experiences. So all these past beings in the Hebrew Testament had different kinds of divine visions of God, different experiences, whether it be that they are walking to God, that angels take them to God, that they ride up in some kind of divine chariot, or they climb a divine ladder. They are experiencing a divine vision of God in higher spiritual realities, is how we should understand those teachings. In Corinthians, Paul speaks of people who have seen Jesus after his resurrection. Seen is the word used. First, Cephas, Peter, saw Jesus. Then other disciples saw Jesus. Then James saw Jesus. Then upwards of 500 disciples saw Jesus. And finally, I myself, Paul, saw Jesus. The English word saw makes it seem like you saw with your two physical eyes, and that's incorrect. Very incorrect. They did not see Jesus with their physical eyes. Paul's Greek term for the word seen in English translations of the Christian Testament is ophthe. Ophthe means to have a divine vision. In other words, you're having a vision of a divine event, not with your physical eyes, but with your inner spiritual eye. If thy eye become one, thy whole body shall be filled with light, the light of God. And that light of God can remain pure consciousness, pure light, or can take the form of whatever is appropriate to the characteristics of the spiritual seeker. That light can become an anthropomorphic form that Enoch witnessed, that Ezekiel witnessed. To the left, you see the divine vision of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is here and he's seeing the seraphim and the cherubim, and he's seeing an anthropomorphic form, a semi-anthropomorphic form of Yahweh on his throne in the highest heaven. So this kind of seeing God is not with your physical eyes. It's seeing God through mystical spiritual experience with an inner eye. The transfiguration event was such a divine ascent in which Jesus allowed James, John, and Peter to see heavenly light. And out of that heavenly light of God came Moses and pardon me, my mind just went out the door. Pardon me. Moses and Elijah, pardon me, the great saint that went up in a chariot of fire to God. He didn't die, he just ascended bodily into heaven on a chariot of fire. So Elijah was also a great, great prophet. So Jesus allowed, when they climbed the mount on Transfiguration evening, however you want to think of it, he allowed James, John, and Peter to experience a divine vision of divine light, in which Jesus communed, spoke with Moses and Elijah, who died many years prior to Jesus' time on earth. So that was a form of divine ascent that happened, apparently could happen to more than one person at a time, if the spiritual master allows it. And this definitely within our tradition, within my apostolic tradition, points to what's called Merkaba mysticism. Merkaba mysticism means throne mysticism. And this is the idea of, particularly of Isaiah and Ezekiel, who rode up in a chariot. They ascended through all the various heavens, or Olamems, to have a vision of God. They saw God in a divine vision. So Jesus is saying, blessed are the pure in heart, those that have purified themselves by doing my teaching, by doing the Torah. For they are seeing God in a divine vision right now. This is saints with names and without names that right now are experiencing God in their divine meditations. They are experiencing God directly, one-on-one in divine vision. Right now, on earth, people are experiencing this. Great beings, great masters, great saints. And you too can have such a divine vision if you seek to purify your heart. Also, Jesus was saying, blessed are the pure in heart, for they are seeing God. They are having a divine vision of God right now in the heavens, beyond this earthly sphere. So this divine vision can be had both on earth and beyond the earth in afterlife realities. It's important to understand that it is inferred in the Christian Testament that Jesus had such a Merkaba experience, that he too rose to the throne of God. God asks Isaiah in the Hebrew Testament, "Whom shall I send to send out my message?" The message to my people, the people of Israel, to those of humanity that want to become one with me, have communion with me. Whom shall I send? And Isaiah said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." So whenever a great prophet makes a Merkaba, ascent to the throne of God, at the throne of God, the king, God, gives the prophet a message to take down to humanity. And that Hebrew word for this message that God gives a prophet to take down to humanity is basor. Basor. Which is a proclamation or a message from a king's throne. Jesus' proclamation, his basor of the coming gospel, implies he made a heavenly ascent to the throne of God. When Jesus says in Mark, and to a lesser extent in Matthew, now the season is come. The sovereignty of God is near. The rulership of God is near. Repent and hear, do my gospel, my proclamation. So Jesus made a divine ascent that we don't have a record of. And God said, tell your people to return to the way of God and to do the teaching that you explicate the people. I am telling you to do this. I am giving you a divine mission, and you are to proclaim my message on earth that you have received from this heavenly throne and this divine vision in this Merkaba ascent. This is how we understand Beatitude number 6. Let us continue with the Liturgy of the Chalice.